How did one of the most prolific con women in British history steal millions from the rich and maybe the famous in a swanky London neighborhood?
And how did the victims and their friends, especially one tireless nurse, bring her to justice?
It's time for a full recap of filthy rituals on this episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. Before we start, a warning that there will be spoilers in this episode for the Global Originals podcast, Filthy Rituals.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on this show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
If you have listened, or if you just want to hear us plan how we're going to pull off our next great con, well, let's get to it.
Okay, before we jump into our thoughts and opinions, we want to just give you a quick overview of how this series pans out. So, a reminder, we've got a character, Juliet D'Souza, a shamanic healer who convinces people to give her wads of cash so it can be put in an envelope and nailed to a tree of life in Suriname. Gobs of cash. What are gobs of cash? I've never heard that phrase before.
I actually was trying to think of how Dee would say that phrase, and that's what I thought of.
Not gobs.
Need some work. Eventually, her victims and their friends band together to expose Juliet's crimes and get her arrested.
She's convicted of 23 counts of fraud and goes to jail for a handful of years.
There's also a coda at the end about a group of Filipino immigrants that get caught up in a visa scam run by Juliet as well. So, all right, Dee. We listened to Filthy Rituals, the whole thing.
We did.
Where should we start? Should we talk about how our initial expectations from the last episode lined up to what actually happened?
Yeah, let's start from there. So, I have feelings towards this podcast.
What are your feelings
towards
this podcast?
Some of them are really good. And some of them are just neutral, fine. It was fine. Some of it was just fine. I will say, if we start with the hosts, in the preview episode, I just didn't warm to them. I thought they were a little bit kind of past remarkable about some of the victims, particularly Keith, who is patient zero in this entire scam, as far as we are aware anyway. I definitely felt as they went through, I warmed up to them. I enjoyed their bits of chat and their interactions with each other. And I didn't feel like they were looking down on the victims as much. But the story, okay, where am I going to go now? What were your thoughts on the hosts?
So this is Hannah McGuire and Sruthi Bala. I thought in the last episode, we talked a little bit about how, they're commenting on the story and how it seemed a little, the tone of it was a little off, but it also did somewhat compared to the thing about Pam, where there was a little bit of a snarky tone, which we liked there, right? That worked in that one. I think it worked in parts here. I think it added some levity to the story. I think there were parts of it I didn't like. And if we can kind of jump around a little bit, there was a bit of a through story that popped up in episode 2 and then popped up, I think, in the last episode where Hannah went to a real shaman and talked about her tidal wave dreams. And that was a part I didn't really care for. I thought that was sort of superfluous to the story. What did you think about that part?
I mean, in itself, if that was a small snippet of a story in itself that I was listening to in a bigger, I don't know, a short story type of podcast, I found it interesting. I really liked hearing. I did love the kind of the chat at the end where it was myth and superstition and family traditions and all these things that we do, because there's definitely things that I do, that my family do, that we're always going to continue doing, even if we say we don't believe that they do anything. And the way they kind of say, really, if anything helps you feel better, you just do it.
Right.
it just felt like a weak connection though. Like, as I said, like, it's not that I wasn't interested in hearing it, but like, yeah, I totally agree. Was it superfluous? Is it like their way of being like, and this is us being involved again?
Yeah, and I think I think you get to the heart of my issue with it. It was interesting. I actually really liked the bit about why you throw spilled salt over your left shoulder, because like the devil sits on your left shoulder, the angel on your right. Like I know the throw salt thing, but I actually didn't know why.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Me neither. And
That
it
was a
makes
cool
sense. Like, I was going to say it makes so much sense. Like it did. Like it was interesting to hear like that aspect of it. I thought it was, you know, it was kind of cool. I think that I love the ones where it's like, I can't remember who it was who said like, oh, in my family, if there's a sports game on, you know, you have to wear the socks or whatever.
Yeah.
Like all of that is just nice.
Yeah,
to
and
hear.
if we back it up a little bit to the context of the tidal wave dream, they were talking to Dalian Adovo, who was that real shaman, and I actually really like that they gave him space to talk about that. Even though we're being sort of dismissive of Juliet D'Souza, like this is a real belief system. There are a lot of parts of the world where this is taken seriously, where this is done, you know, sort of more ethically, I guess. I don't know what the right word would be, but that she is, you know, obviously a scam artist, like she is a con artist, and she is abusing this tradition. But I thought he gave a lot of credibility to shamanism and a different kind of cultural perspective, which was nice. I like that they took that seriously. Right, that was episode 2, I think, if I remember correctly. So that was nice that it came that early in the show.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a nice balance between obviously how Juliet like deals with it. You know, she just takes advantage of that part of the culture, which kind of happens, I suppose, with every culture, with anything that has any sort of like vulnerability like attached to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do agree. I thought that balance was good. I think in my moving on like to the stuff that I just felt like was superfluous, I feel like a lot of episode 1 and 2, I don't know, I feel like it could have been curtailed. I feel like it could have been in one episode. Like it felt like it was really just hammering on the point. Like, okay, like I get it. She got control over Keith. He was vulnerable. I just felt like it went too far. And then from Keith, she got into other people. I just felt like 1 and 2 could have really been like squished together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and that actually gets to something more, maybe it's about the host, or maybe it's just about the construction of the show. I think the nature of the crime is such that, you know, the last couple of podcasts we focused on were about pretty gruesome murders, and one of them treated it very like it was a very sober podcast. That was the Inside the Crime, the Unalinsky story, and it was a very serious show. Dealt with it, you know, in a very like straightforward, calm manner. And then the thing about Pam, which was almost like whimsical, goofy, and yet also about a very serious series of crimes. This one, yeah, it was hard maybe to get as much empathy for the victims, most of the victims. I think the victim that I felt the most empathy for was Sylvia. But Sylvia didn't come in really until episode 4.
Okay, so like, yeah, I totally agree. I feel like it was hard. It wasn't until episode 3 that I was like, okay, this is slightly interesting. And then episode 4 is where I'm not even going to say gripped, but I'm going to say more interested because of the Hampstead Justice Club.
Hampstead Justice, yeah.
Oh my God, love them. So just for context, that is Sylvia was one of the victims. An elderly lady, we discussed her in episode 1. She was a former opera singer, and she was, by all accounts, she sounded lovely. Like I wanted to be her friend. She has since passed away. But her really close, good friend, Maria, is another person I just like need to sit down and have a cup of tea with. She kind of led the charge. Like her and Sylvia's friends banded together to support Sylvia, but also to catch Juliet.
Right.
And that part, like, yes, I am in. I need to know more about Maria. And I was invested in it, but it was really only episode 4 and 5 where that story was told. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. But again, like I felt like this could be one long episode, I feel like, this entire series.
Yeah. So these were it was 6 episodes. They're each about 45 minutes long, which I think, yeah, especially for those first few episodes, it was on the long side. I think, yeah, episode 4 was called How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria, which, as a sidebar, I feel like the sort of jokiness of the titles, I did look at the episode titles as I was listening to them. That bugged me a little bit. Like the 5th one was called The Paper Trail Trial, which is just sort of like a slight wordplay joke, which I didn't really care for. And episode 3, to jump around non-sequentially, Wherefore Art Thou, Juliet, always bugs me when people use wherefore to mean where, when wherefore means why. That's just a English major, like, pet peeve of mine. But yeah, episode 4, the Maria episode, the Sylvia story, was, I think, the heart of it. The Hampstead Justice League was great. If they had built the whole story around them, around their investigation, which, yeah, carried through to the trial, right?
Yeah.
Like them in the courtroom saying, no, wait, we've got this bit of evidence, and helping out the lawyers. Like that was amazing.
I mean, it was amazing, but it was also like, how unprepared are you?
Yeah, how do you not have the print copy of the
how
article?
How unstructured is this?
Yeah.
That like nobody has any, like there's no organization, it seemed, to it. The way they'd be saying, oh, like this piece of evidence, and then Maria would be like, it's in this box, or we have X, Y, and Z because I know all the papers, and then the police run in and get it and come back. It just was like comical nearly.
Well, and I think this is why Sylvia's story resonates so much, is they went into detail about her. She had such a tragic story of being kind of successful in the 60s and 70s, and having this sort of fall where she gets sucked into this scam, giving away all of her money despite her friends trying to help. And Maria just did all of these things for her, right? Like she opened up that bank account for her where she's like, she can only spend from this bank account on like food and clothes, maybe something else. But I think it was just like,
so this is like just when she has nothing left, and she's like, I want to give you something, but I can see there's like trouble here. I want to give you like something, but like structure it.
Right. Like Maria just gives and gives and gives. She helps
her.
her.
The friend who does the bathroom up for her.
Yeah.
I loved the side bit where, because at the end, like she didn't actually have any money to pay her, so the friend Kitty, who helps her do up the bathroom, they like do this little barter system of like, okay, I did up your bathroom and I paid for it, so can you give me free singing lessons? And she's like, sure. I loved that little aside. I
love a barter.
Cute.
Barter's always great. Yeah. And then, I mean, there's other stuff in there. And this is all episode 4, right? So Maria tries going to the cops. The cops are like, there's no crime here. She gave up the money willingly. She's like, well, we can go to the cops, we can go to the press. What's it going to be? Like, she basically like...
The line, I have it down here. We have 2 avenues to pursue. And I was like, oh my God, she is gas.
She's great. And then, yeah, like Maria just gets all these boxes of stuff from Keith and spends 2 years. She gets off her nursing shift. She comes home. She pours through these boxes looking for anything to get Juliet. Like that. I mean, that's a movie right there. Like the Maria and Sylvia story is a movie. So, yeah, I think episode 4 is really the heart of this. That was the peak for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, there was so much to that. Like the way Maria basically did both her job and the job of the police.
Yeah.
And it seems some of the lawyer, the prosecutor, going every Thursday, even at the end, for a coffee and a biscotti. And as if she is the one to bump into Juliet, and she is the one to find her.
You're talking about she's basically staked her out. Like, she's like, I'm going to find this woman so that they can arrest her. Yeah. Yeah.
So every single, was it Thursday or Tuesday? I feel like I've written down Thursday, but it might have been a Tuesday. But anyway, she used to go to where she thinks she is, and she'd go for her coffee and her biscotti, which is like a lovely aside. And then finds her, like literally walks into her on the street, and then is able to like get the police, go straight to the police station.
The
her little tidbit of like, and of course the police station in Hampstead is a very idyllic building.
right,
Like,
right.
this is so funny.
The there's a couple other bits that I think are like make episode 4 stand out to me. One is the trap they set for when they think that the money is going to come back, and they have like this like party with sandwiches at Sylvia's. There's the heavily armed policewoman there who's allergic to cats. Of course, Sylvia has all these cats. Just the idea of this one policewoman who's got all this like combat gear on and is armed and goes and hides in the pantry or something and can't take the cats. That's a great detail.
Yeah, it was. I like Sylvia just broke my heart. Like her isolation. Like when she's asked by Maria, like, what's going on? She's like, I can't break a friend's confidence.
Right. Which was part of the
Talking
scam.
about
Yeah.
Juliet. And then her fear that something was happening or something was going to happen. And obviously we didn't know what that fear really was. But, well, before her sister passed away, it was that her, you know, if you do anything wrong, it'll
Yep.
be your fault that your sister passes away. But the fear at that point, like it brought me back to, I think it was episode 3 where they were talking about the couple, the married couple, and Juliet had given them some like eye thing to put on the back of their door, and it said like, you know,
Oh, it
this-
sees you.
this sees you and it hears you at
Yeah.
all times. Just take the eye out, like. But anyway,
No, but Sylvia
but-
also like would like she's
had
like, well,
that
we used to
fear.
sit on the couch and watch TV together, her and Juliet, and like she just kept thinking that Juliet, like she just wanted the best. Like she just had such a kind, giving heart, I think,
Yeah.
which was so hard.
And then, but what was also so hard then was like the torture, like when Sylvia's sister does pass away, like what Juliet says to her is, it's on you.
Right, it's
Like
your fault.
you gave her wine. It's
Yeah.
your fault she died. Pure torture. And then, you know, when eventually Sylvia realizes just after that tea party, it was at that point, I think it was when she fully realizes like, oh, this is a scam. And Maria says like, it was the first time in so many years that I was actually able to reach her. But like the look on her face and how ashen she was, like it was heartbreaking. Like that whole description, like that's going to be the thing. Sylvia and Maria are going to be the thing. Like they will be what I remember from this podcast.
Well, and you said this, I think, well before, like if this had been, rather than a 6-part podcast, like if this was an episode of This American Life, or,
Yeah.
you know, a show, like there's other shows that do like 1-episode stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that obviously would have been the story. I mean, they went in enough detail that could have been the standalone story. There's other ones that they mention that they don't really get into that I think could have also been the story. Like the one that I wrote down was Naomi. I don't know if you remember that one. She was the one, this is in episode 2, who really wanted a baby. And so Juliet basically does the same scam of the nail the money to the tree in Suriname. She gets pregnant, and then Juliet basically says, like, you have to abort this baby. And she does. And like, I'm sure there's more to that story. But that was so tragic, right? Like there's, I mean, they kind of, in episode 2, they just sort of rattle through all the victims and how much money they gave, like the different, you know, individuals. There was a couple that had a kid with Down syndrome. There was, you know, a married couple. There was some like famous actress who gave almost £1 million. They rattle off like Princess Di maybe had a connection, like John Cleese's daughter, like Robert Redford was mentioned, but they don't go into any detail.
They were all mentioned by Juliet at some point to
Right.
different people.
Right.
So it's
So-
kind of to give her clout, I suppose.
Yeah. So we don't get any more about those. They just kind of, their names just get thrown in there.
And like, I suppose the thing is about the other victims, like they did say like it was kind of hard to find people to actually speak out about it.
Yeah.
And like you can understand it because like there's an element of like, I can only imagine there's an element of feeling stupid for having ever fallen for something.
Yeah.
And admitting that to people. And the same way in a way, I suppose, when Keith spoke about his wife and, you know, the isolation of having someone with an addiction. I think it seems like the isolation came on top of isolation because of people feeling like they were, you know, to blame for falling for something, when it's really just that someone, Juliet was just, as all scammers do, they were like preying on a vulnerability within people, and like just didn't care, like it was all for the money. And it was just I
Well,
can't get Sylvia out of my head. It was so heartbreaking.
yeah, and I guess,
And
well, sorry, go ahead.
no, go on.
Well, if you think about which people got interviewed, right? Like we get Keith Bender, who we talked about before as being sort of this like aloof, kind of just an odd character. So, and he's like patient zero, right? Like we get that from the beginning of episode 1. So he gets a lot of airtime. Sylvia has passed on, so she's not available to be talked to for this. Maria is her friend, so Maria wasn't directly a victim. We have Keith McMahon, who wasn't a direct victim. He was the manager of the flats that Juliet rented out. We have Tim Raymond, who is a journalist, so not a victim, but sort of a tangential figure. There's Josh, the photographer. Like of the people that we hear from, there's the couple, the Hampstead, the animal lovers, the ones who are upset about the
Louise
monkey.
and Michael.
Yes.
They call him Click.
Yeah.
They call Keith Click. That's so funny.
Yeah, the Click thing. Yeah. But really the only victim we hear from is Keith, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't get to talk to any other of these victims. They mentioned them, some of them by name, some of them by pseudonyms. But to your point that people didn't really want to talk about it, whether they were embarrassed or for whatever reason. I mean, the police also had that trouble, right? Like they were only able to sentence her to 10 years, of which she served some smaller amount.
Because of 23 counts of it, yeah.
Yeah, because they couldn't get more victims to come forward and admit to this, which hinders the podcast, I think. Right? Like some of these folks are really interesting to hear from, but they were a few steps removed from the crime. And I think, you know, when you hear something like when we talked about Inside the Crime, where, you know, it's this small community, and you're hearing so much from people who are so central to the case, right? Like we talked about the time that we didn't hear from any members of the Linsky family, which is true, but we heard from all these other people, and that was a crime from 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But we still heard from a lot of people who were there that night, who were eyewitnesses to what happened. But here we get more just like people 2 or 3 steps removed from the crime.
Yeah. Which is frustrating, I suppose, maybe from a listener's point of view. It goes back to what I think we both agree, which is like 6 episodes, 45-ish minutes each, just too long for... Like maybe if they had more people, more witnesses, more victims, they could fill that better. But because of their lack of that, it's like they tried to stuff like filler stuff into it.
Well, let me ask you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Go on.
One of the questions I want to ask you was kind of related to that filler question, which is you said in our last episode that you kind of you wanted to write down what you thought was going to happen. Like, did this follow those beats that you were expecting then?
I mean, like, I wouldn't have been able to obviously put everything together, but I think more or less, like, I don't know that like there was anything wild. In fact, at some points I felt like they were teeing things up as if it was going to be like so dramatic. There was one part,
yeah, like what? What's a good example of that?
And do you know where Juliet was in those months when she was supposed to be back in London? She was in prison in Suriname waiting trial. Okay, because she scammed someone there too. Like, that's not shocking.
Yeah.
Like, that's not at all shocking, surely. Like, she's in prison somewhere else for doing the thing that she was doing here. I felt like it's not a twist.
No,
do you know?
That's a good point. Yeah, actually, that whole episode, that was episode 3, where Tim Raymond, the journalist, goes to Suriname, tries to track her down, gets some pictures of her, and I listened to that episode twice, and I really just like wanted more drama from it. Like I wanted more to
So I
happen.
was going to ask that, like, did you find it like that it was tense? Because I think it was being teed up to be like extremely tense. And like there were aspects to it, of course. Like, look, if you're being held and you know, like the head of border control or something
Yeah.
is like in charge or whatever, and some guy is like, I'm the same as one of the hosts who said basically, as soon as I go through customs or I'm in an airport or wherever, I just assume I've done something wrong. Like I assume that there's something in my bag, even though I'm like literally like there's nothing other than my clothes or whatever. Like I just assume that like something's going to happen. I'll
How,
never forget like traveling through, I think we were leaving Bali years ago, and there was all these big stories about like tourists leaving, like bringing drugs out of the country from Bali, I think maybe to Australia. That's where we were headed. But I remember these big massive signs being like, you know, drug trafficking, like you get like, I think they had like life, what's the word? God, words.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You know when you get killed, the death penalty.
Death
I think
penalty.
they had something along those, or else life in prison. And I remember looking at it and being terrified. Paul was like, why are you scared? Like, you have no drugs on you. And I'm like, I know, but what if? Like, yeah. So anyway, sorry, side note. I found the two of them like very interesting.
This is Tim and
like,
the
okay.
photographer, John.
Yeah, thanks. Context. Tim and the photographer, John. And I was like, oh, these are interesting. But like, okay, first of all, like, you're never going to organize anything for me. They just go with no plan. They just fly down there, and then like the whole like scene of them trying to look like tourists was so funny. Like, just take photos and pretend we're interested in architecture.
Yeah, interested in architecture. Also, like the tip of like just park the car facing the other direction, and that's how.
And them hiding in the back. I'm
yeah, yeah.
I look in the back of a car if I'm walking by it. But anyway, I did also enjoy like the slow motion car chase.
That was good.
Because like I was only literally telling this to someone recently. We were talking about what you do if someone's behind you and they're driving too close to you, or someone's angry with you on the road. And I'm like, oh, I just slow down. Like I go a bit slow. I wave and say hi. Like it's like my mom does when she's like trying to get out of a turn. She'll wave and say thank you before someone has stopped. And then everyone stops, because you're not going to say no to someone who's waving and saying thank you. I mean, like I'm on for that. But again, I was like, this is surely going to bring us somewhere. Yeah. I didn't. It would have been a great standalone, like, comedic episode or, like, short story on This American Life or something like that. But, like...
Was it a good tip to hide your contraband in your dirty underwear?
I mean, I feel like that's, like, fairly, like, standard, no?
I mean, yeah, usually when I have contraband, that's what I do. Yeah.
It was, like, yeah, it was very, very funny. I found that whole thing very interesting. I just kind of wish it went somewhere further. Do you know, if I'm bothering to learn these people's names, who obviously 2 minutes ago couldn't remember them, but like I want to, like, you know, I want to get connected to them. I want to know more about them. But like, sure.
Well, I think the same thing could be said of Juliet's, was her boyfriend or husband, the one who was the cop.
They flip-flopped. I think some people thought it was her husband and some people thought it was her boyfriend. So,
well, whoever he was, I mean, it sounded like he was in the middle of some scandals, right? Like he had left his wife for Juliet, and he was clearly like a corrupt cop of some kind. Well, I don't know. I guess we don't know. But I feel like there was an interesting story there.
I mean, she was probably scamming him too.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, probably. But I mean, the same thing I think you could said for the Filipino immigrants who were talked about just in the last episode, right? Like they come in sort of out of nowhere, and you kind of get why, right? Like they are on the margins of society. They don't really have the same recourse as these rich folks from Hampstead. They can't really go to the police. They are an incredibly vulnerable population, and they are caught up in this visa scam. That would have been that could have been a whole story on its own.
So I kind of hated the way that they were just at the aside. And I get like that, like, you know, there's going to be very few maybe who are like on the margins, and they wouldn't maybe feel confident or comfortable coming forward for all the reasons, if they're undocumented or if they just feel a bit more vulnerable in society. But like having them as this aside kind of felt like you're making them more of an aside, if
Well,
that makes sense. I didn't
yeah.
love that. I thought there was so many that I was like, oh my goodness, like Evangeline, who is not her real name, who gave like 4.5 grand of for undocumented to get out of her undocumented visa status.
Hmm.
Like there was a whole family, Oscar and his family, there was Velma, there was Lily, there were so many people, and it just felt like nothing. And the cheek of her running this when she's being like
Yeah.
she's on trial.
I think too, on top of that, there is the broader political issue in England, like the hostile environment, like their draconian immigration policy, which is referenced, but like I mean that, like I guess I keep coming back to This American Life, but like the NPR version of this story would get into like
Politics.
the broader political world of England, and just that environment where immigrants are treated like this, right? Like where this is their policy. This is there's a bigger story here that they don't really get into, and I think they get a little bit caught up in the Hampstead kind of like lives of the rich and wealthy and their tea parties and sandwiches, and not so much on like how England treats its immigrants, which I, as an American, not one to talk, but it's also bad there, but we don't really get that story. Like we get bits of it, but not a lot.
Yeah. And yet, though, we're saying like maybe this wasn't. Do you think if they would have delved into more of that in like the second, split the 6 episodes into a 3 and 3, you would have found that was what like well done? Or do you just feel like all of it married together doesn't really work?
I think we should write up some notes, maybe draft an outline, send it over to them, to Hannah and Sruthi, see like, hey, what do you think about like a V2? We can kind of iterate on your structure. Maybe.
Oh God, very work wordy going on there.
No, all right, we can let that go. But
yeah, I feel like I don't know whether like I say that as well, and I totally agree with you. Like I feel like I want to know more about those people, because like it's those connections that like they tug at my heartstrings, and I kind of said it in episode 1. And sorry, Keith, but like there was nothing. I didn't connect to him as a character in the story or as a person in the story. I don't know whether it's because we heard from him too much nearly. And he's very blasé, which I'm sure has a lot to do with how much he's been through over the last 2 decades. But like, I just didn't connect to him. Whereas Sylvia and Maria, I connected to, and I could connect to the group of Filipino immigrants who have gone through. Like I felt a connection to them in whatever way, and I wanted to know more about them.
Let me ask you this, because this is another angle that I think they could have taken and they chose not to, but they alluded to a couple times. So we've talked about Keith and how he was maybe a little bit hard to connect to. Do you think he was as innocent as he claims to be?
I think he was definitely not the person orchestrating the whole thing. I think, I did feel, and this sounds so patronizing, but I did feel like proud of him in a way when he was like, when he felt that what the fuck have I done moment of this is really bad. And then the 2 Keiths join forces. So Keith's name is on the lease for the 5 or 6 apartments.
Yeah.
And the other Keith is, what do they call him?
McMahon, yeah.
He's the one who owns the apartment. So he gets onto him and they like join forces and go through the place, whatever. Like, I kind of felt a sense of like, finally, like there's something here. But that was the only time I felt that there was any sort of like anger or feeling towards them. But again, like we're talking a 20-year situation. Like this has had a profound impact on his life, that maybe the feeling is just not what we want it to be.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think there was just sort of a disconnect there that I never really got. I never really felt good about. I never really felt a connection with. And yeah, building, I mean, certainly spending so much time at the beginning, but then throughout the podcast on Keith, I think, yeah, it sort of limited my like emotional connection to the story.
I did, like, I felt like the end of episode 4 or a start of episode 5, I can't remember which one, they were teeing up the whole, and there'd be one person they really were interested in, as if Keith was going to be this big figure of the trial, and he was mentioned a little bit, but not a huge amount. I did find it interesting how he was mentioned for a couple of reasons. First of all, kind of in my head it twigged. So in our previous 2 podcasts, so episode 3 and 4, we talked about the thing about Pam.
Right.
And in Betsy's trial, or sorry, in the trial of Russ, in the Russ Faria's trial, for when he's been tried for Betsy's murder, they're not allowed to bring up Pam because it would create a red herring. But in this case, they were allowed to bring up Keith and like really kind of hammer into him a little bit, being like, you were complicit and it was you and blah blah blah. And he was like, they were asking me so many questions, and I was just like, this is all a lie. But I found it interesting that they were able to do that, and yet in the other one, like, Pam wasn't even being able to be brought up. Like, nothing was able to be asked of her, like, to make it look like she was complicit in it. So I thought that thing was interesting.
Which at the time,
did you notice that?
Yeah, with the Russ trial, it was. I mean, that was sort of the I don't know, malfeasance of the prosecution on,
and the judge,
and I guess and the judge too, because really like that's sort of inexcusable. Like why the jury wouldn't get to hear anything about Pam there, but here that was like Juliet's whole defense, right? Like, it wasn't me, it was Keith. Like Keith's name was on the lease. Keith was the one who had the bank account. Keith's the one who was taking all the envelopes of cash. Like, it was all like that. She had set that up the whole way, right? Like, my name isn't anywhere. And it was only because Maria found her handwritten note saying, like, here's what you do with the money. Like, that was seemingly the crux of the case.
I know, and it's gas, like the handwritten note. Like, again, we go back to like a handwriting, like, expert. Like, is that really a thing? Like, I was looking it up, and people are like, well, it's not really an exact science. So I went back to when I said last in episode 4, like, I faked my mother's signature many a time on a school note or whatever.
From your knowledge, I mean, it sounds like you're an expert on this. Where does handwriting fall in the spectrum of fingerprints, which I know are not great evidence? There's DNA evidence, which I think also has been called into question about like how much we rely on it. There's polygraphs, right?
Polygraphs and handwriting are up there together, surely.
As not good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Surely.
Okay. All right.
The other thing about the trial that I want to just bring up is, first of all, Juliet's defense lawyer, Mr. Fiddler. I was like, it's such a gas name for a defense lawyer, like, who's like defending a scam artist.
Fiddler.
Fiddler. Brilliant. Anyway, the way he's like disgusted even now at the idea that Mr. Bender, he's a professional man. How could he be under the coercive control of a woman? Like, is this just an old school view where a man cannot be controlled by a woman? Because, like, that's just inaccurate.
Yeah.
And, like, bizarre. But I did enjoy the host did bring that up, and they did kind of call that out. But yeah, I thought it was funny.
That is funny. Well, I feel like we've kind of bounced around a little bit, but I feel like we've covered most of the points of this. I feel like we're kind of circling around. Like, if we want to get down to it, like, did you think this was worth the time?
I mean, I just find it hard to say no when I'm thinking of Sylvia and Maria and the Hampstead Justice Club.
If someone was going to listen to just one episode, episode 4.
Yeah.
Lock in on that episode.
Yeah.
Everything about that episode is gold.
Everything. Episode 4, and like there's elements of episode 5 with the trial.
Yep.
Louise and Michael, we touched on them a little bit. Like, great couple. Again, want to sit down with them for a drink or a tea or something. They were really like, it was all the older, like, detective-y type people that, like, I really enjoyed.
All right, so we rename this the Hampstead Justice League.
Cut out, 4 episodes and just leave it with 2.
I think that'd be a solid podcast. Yeah.
I think so too.
All right, so let's reformat what our show is about. So going forward, So Much Crime, So Little Time is going to be about just restructuring existing podcasts, editing them down. That's our new thing.
That's our new format.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Before we do leave, I need to say the next time we take a podcast, can it be like not with lazy police? Like the police here, there was 2 police women, Louise and Fiona, mentioned, and I was like, yes.
Linda and Fiona. Louise
Thank
was
you.
the
oh yeah, I just said her name there. What a name. And they like adopted the monkey, basically. We forgot to mention the monkey, but anyway, very cute.
Joey the monkey.
Joey the monkey. But so the 2 policewomen, I was like, yes, policewoman, they're gonna rock it. And like, they were the ones to bring it, not saying they didn't, but we didn't hear anything really about them. Like, they were being, again, teed up as if they were going to be like big characters within the story. And I just feel like they weren't.
They mostly seemed just like impressed at Maria and how great she was.
Yeah. And I mean, that's easy. Like, she is great. She seems great. But like, it would just be nice if, like, are any police doing their job? Come on, lads. Like, what's happening?
This is becoming a bit of a theme. Yeah.
I know. We need to get a different one.
All right. Well, I want to say too, as we kind of close this out, I think in terms of like, if like who I would recommend this for, I mean, I presume at this point, if you're listening to this, you've probably listened to the show, but if you haven't, I mean, one thing I guess I did like about this was, other than what we've talked about with Maria and Sylvia, it's a lighter story. Like, yes, it's a story about a bunch of people losing their money, but it's a lighter true crime story. Yeah, there's no grisly murder. No one gets murdered in the whole thing, and so I think that is it's a little bit of a palate cleanser in that way. So anyway, on that note, we're gonna go to something. Should we talk about our next one?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it. On the next episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time, we're going to preview The Retrievals from Serial Productions and the New York Times. This is a true crime story about women who went to the Yale Fertility Center to pursue pregnancy through IVF. But a part of the process called egg retrieval caused them excruciating pain. Something was wrong, criminally wrong. Yet the pain these women went through was minimized and dismissed. What happened and how was it allowed? We'll dig into the first episode of The Retrievals and help you decide if this crime is worth your valuable time. On the next, So Much Crime, So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.